Hello and welcome to India Hangout. Tragic news this morning as the Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 was shot down by suspected terrorists on the border of Ukraine on a flight from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur. Almost everyone, or rather everyone on board died, about 298 passengers. All nationalities are not known at this point. The question we are asking, however, today is, could airlines or can airlines be more preemptive about situations like this? Could this route have been put aside as something that was more dangerous? And to that extent, can airlines take better care of their passengers' safety? That's a question we're asking today. My guests are Jitender, Bhargava, former director at Air India, Subhash Goyal, chairman, Indian Chambers of Commerce, Aviation and Tourism Committee, also chairman of the STIC Travel Group, and with me, of course, Ayaz Memon, my co-anchor. Ayaz?
Well, look, I think
what a way to begin a day.
Yeah, it's a terrible story. I think from a consumer's point of view or from a layperson's point of view, the fear of air travel seems to be growing. I mean, I don't know if it can develop into something called paranoia. Perhaps it could. The worst, the more sorry aspect of this is, of course, that within 3 or 4 months, this is the second Malaysian Airlines tragedy. Which is it may be it's just a complete coincidence, but it just casts a very deep shadow over the airlines, and how people think and talk, and already you can find in social media all kinds of things emerging, which may be completely nonsensical, but at least it tells you what people are thinking about.
And it reflects their paranoia. Right. So, Mr. Bhargava, can I come to you? So, let me give you the facts, right? Before, a few months ago, there were 300 to 400 flights a day over this route. In the last month or so, especially after March 3rd, when there was an attack on a transport aircraft, the number of flights had come down to 100. Right? So obviously, many airlines, including Qantas, Cathay Pacific, Korean Air, Asiana, among others, had already pulled out of that route because they found it unsafe, at least for their passengers. Others continue to fly, though it also appears that the International Civil Aviation Organization did not specifically give out any warning. Right? But however, many airlines had already taken preemptive steps. So the question here is, did the airline or could the airlines have been more careful? And were they trying in some ways to obviously stick to a route which was economically viable and more affordable, and thus eventually endanger passenger lives?
You see, in the aviation industry, it is not the airlines which decide what airways will they follow. It's like the highways on the road, that you predetermine this is the kind of routing an aircraft will follow from point A to point B. Now, each airline doesn't decide this. There are bodies and which are well versed with the whole thing who decide to take into consideration all factors. Now, if there was an iota of kind of a risk involved, I'm sure ICAO or IATA or major airlines would have put pressure and seen to it that the airlines adopted a different routing. But the fact that it continued and there was everything was okay till Malaysian Airlines tragedy took place. Now, I would look at it, if one is to analyze the whole thing. Airlines on their own, as I said, don't take decisions on these
but other airlines seem to have pulled out, right? Qantas pulled out, Cathay Pacific pulled out.
They may have done for different reasons, but not arising out of safety risk. Let me explain to you. Otherwise, if one airline had followed, everybody would have followed, because nobody would take even 1 point fraction of a chance as far as safety is concerned. But to me, the alarm bells should have rung when on Monday a cargo plane was shot down. It's not an aviation issue, let me clarify. It's a political, military issue that's the cause of it now. But somebody should have taken a call that, look, could this have happened? Now that is where I would fall these well-known bodies which are represented by all countries on it. Now they should have taken a call on it and said, look, we need to be erring on the side of caution. Now, I think that was probably not done. B, as United States has said, and some of these countries have said, it was doubtful that they had a capability to shoot down an aircraft 10 kilometers up in the air at a height of 30,000 feet and above.
But
the fact is, these missiles that you have can go up to 49,000 feet. And somebody has demonstrated it.
72,000 feet is what I read. But that's not the key point here. Mr. Goyal, let me come to you. Are you getting a sense that all airlines are being equally careful about the routes that they're flying, given the fact that many airlines have pulled out or had pulled out from this air route over Ukraine, whereas some continue to fly?
You see, whenever an airline has to fly from point A to point B, there are air corridors which are predetermined.
Right.
Now, it is the option of the airline, if it doesn't want to follow a particular air corridor, but it has to get the permission of the civil aviation authorities of the country from which it is exiting and the airspace in which it is going. So every country has their own towers which control the flow of air traffic. And as Mr. Bhargava was mentioning, that after the tragedy of the cargo plane, all airlines should have taken the precaution and following an alternative corridor, which would be over Turkey or over Russian territory. But unfortunately, this was not done. Secondly, International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, of which all countries are members, they should have also issued a directive on the safety and security of the air corridors. Now, this unfortunate tragedy, which is the second tragedy for Malaysia Airlines, and that also on their anniversary, coming on just starting of their anniversary year, it is very, very unfortunate. And more unfortunate than for Malaysian Airlines is the poor passengers, for no fault of theirs, have lost their lives. A lot of loved ones have, so this is something which the aviation community of the world for decades to come will not forget, and we should learn a lesson from this, that any airspace, whether it is over Israel and Palestine, whether it is over Afghanistan or whether it is over this, if even 1% of doubt is there that air attacks or rocket launchers, etc., will be used, then it is advisable, and ICAO should be monitoring this on a regular basis, and they should have done. It is an international tragedy for which the entire air safety organizations of the world should feel ashamed.
Right. Okay. So there are 2 points here, Mr. Bhargava. So one is whether the airlines should have been more proactive. For instance, Air India was still flying and Jet Airways was still flying.
Every airline
but now,
in the world.
yeah,
Every airline in the world was flying.
Except for those, except for Qantas, Cathay Pacific, Korean Air, and ASEAN Airways were already pulled out.
Yeah.
Among others,
which are the
whose names I
countries
don't
involved
have.
in
Yeah.
this Ukraine crisis? Let's put it this way. You got Russia, you got Ukraine, with America playing a role itself. Now the USSR, the Russian plane were using the same corridor. The American airlines were using the same corridor. So if there was an element of risk involved, they wouldn't have allowed their carriers to fly on this.
No, but I'm saying my question is, obviously there were some airlines which were playing it safe. That 1% that Mr.
If you
Goel
look
talked
at it,
about.
what they've said is that there were 3 corridors very close to each other. Malaysian Airline also was using the other corridor for these first 16 flights of the month of July, and it was yesterday only that they used the extreme left corridor kind of thing to go. You can, in retrospect, say, well, he used wrongly. The fact is, as we all know, that you had India's Prime Minister's flight. You had the Russian president's flight. Do you think they will operate their president's flight on a route which is risky?
No, I think
certainly not going to happen.
No, I think the question is, do people pay sufficient attention to a possible risk just because it's never happened before?
That's a question that will need to be looked into. Somebody has goofed up. The fact is, if you knew that the skirmish is taking place between the Russia-controlled Ukraine and the Ukrainian government itself, and they are going up to an extreme of taking into custody or acquiring these missiles which can go up to 49,000 feet, somebody should have woken up to it that there is a risk involved. Now that is where I would say things have gone wrong. But as I said, ICAO IATA, all airlines abide by certain guidelines which are given. There are expert agencies which look into all this, who give directions to the airlines. Now, the very fact that within hours of this tragedy, every airline said, we are going to overfly, we're going to bypass Ukraine kind of a thing to go by. Now, that's the kind of directions needed. As I said earlier, on Monday, when you had the cargo plane shooting down, you knew the scale. It was not the various governments or the airlines who will know the scale of hostilities between these two countries. Now, when such a thing had happened, somebody should have woken up and said, I'm going to be erring on the side of caution, issue a direction to the airlines, refrain from flying on that route. Now, that should have done, and perhaps that could have avoided the tragedy.
Right. Okay. Mr. Goel, can I come to you now? Do you feel that all airlines are equally proactive in this regard? I mean, no one is saying that they're not concerned about safety, but obviously there's a commercial equation to it. These are economically viable routes. Going around will obviously mean more fuel burn and a potential hit on the bottom line. So, is this something that maybe airlines were not taking that extra step because they were being commercially driven?
No, you have to balance between the air safety requirements of the passengers and the commercial interest of the airlines. I think those airlines who value the safety interest more in the long-term gain, whereas those airlines who cut corners and try to save less fuel by following a particular, I mean,
Subhash, please let me. You see, you will never have a situation where an airline will willingly take a risk that I'm going to be saving a few $1,000 or few $100,000, and therefore I will cut corners. It does not happen in the aviation industry. As I said, you have the wealthiest of nations whose airlines are flying on this route. If you had third world countries' airlines only operating on this sector, in this corridor, and European carriers were not, American carriers were not, I would have bought this argument.
So, but the question only arises from the counterfactual, which is why was Qantas or Cathay Pacific not flying?
There may be other reasons. Somebody should look into it. As I said, all European airlines, Singapore Airlines, American carriers, they were all operating on this sector. And what could be a bigger example than to say that you have the Russian president
and the Indian
following this Malaysian plane, Indian
but maybe they
Prime Minister.
But that also tells you that they were not being cognizant enough of a potential risk.
But that's what I said. The fact is, it is not because of cutting corners or anything. It's perhaps the oversight that they did not understand the gravity of the situation.
But that's the point. That's the point.
That is where somebody is to be made answerable. How is it that this, and mind you, it is not the aviation agencies. They draw their kind of information, their directions from the governments, like the United States, the US, Russia, and these kind of countries.
Mr. Goel, you were saying?
Please, I'd like to make one very valid point. If 3 or 4 airlines can avoid a particular air corridor, then other airlines can also do it. No civil aviation authority can force an airline to fly a particular corridor, right? So there are other corridors which one could have taken from Amsterdam to Malaysia. For example, when a plane goes from India to London, it necessarily doesn't have to fly over Ukraine. It can take the Turkey and the other corridor, which flies over Turkey and via Frankfurt goes to London. So the point is that yes, mistakes have been made. Mistakes have been made by ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization. Mistakes have been made by Malaysia Airlines and by those airlines, whether it is the president of Russia or any other VVIP. That if a particular area is a war zone area, then the life of a small individual is as precious as the president of a particular country. No life should be risked. And those areas and those air corridors have to be avoided. And this is a wake-up call for the International Civil Aviation Organization and all those safety organizations in the world which talk about safety, but here
as a point or a question.
No, I just thought that, to extend the dimensions of this debate, what is emerging to us is a new reality. In the geopolitical order. One is the adventurism of people who are in conflict, that it's almost like an intergalactic war, that nobody ever thought that planes would be shot down 30,000 feet high. That kind of ammo is available, and we all don't know whose hands this kind of ammo has gone. So till now we thought all these conflict zones were land related or at most sea related, but air related is a new reality that is emerging.
And the sophisticated
and the sophistication, surface to air missiles, and therefore it's it's whether now
for the aviation world to sit up and take note or respond to it.
You see, the aviation industry has been taking cognizance of safety. That's why better engines, better aircraft structure and all. Security is a different ball game, and that's why the governments come in. Now, if you look at the past track record, every aircraft victim belonged to a country with which the terrorists had something to do or they were offended about, And this is the case where you have a totally non-partisan country airline being shot down and accidentally shot. That's why the need for an independent probe to bring out who did it. Now, the fact is, irrespective of whether the tragedy of 298 people did, the reality is, if there are people on ground who can shoot down an aircraft up there, there is something needed to be done. Now, you can't have people getting hold of these kind of missiles and using it. Look at the kind of havoc that they can cause. And if you get into an aircraft, and you will be always apprehensive, I do not know what happens in the next kilometer of my flight.
So that's the question. So what happens on the geopolitical side or on the on-ground, I mean, from a law and order or a terrorism side, is something that we cannot unfortunately do much about because it's happening in a remote land. But what we can do about is the airlines that fly past these routes and the passengers who decide to fly these airlines. So let's talk about that. What should airlines be doing now in this new world order that we are conscious of?
Now, if you look at it now, one second, Jitender, if you look at the world now, there are umpteen conflict zones. So where do you stop flying? Over that?
Syria being another example.
That's where I give you the example. You see, as long as the skirmishes on ground, airlines are safe up there. But yesterday's is an alarm
Change the rules.
That look, you are under threat even at that high altitude. Now that is where somebody will need to do, and these governments will have to work, or the Americans and these world leaders kind of a thing to look at, that we must have a check on who all possess these kind of missiles. Government is one, non-state actors another thing. Now that's where the controversy is.
So which is my point. I mean, you can't do much about non-state actors, at least from where we are sitting
you can
right
control.
now.
After all, missiles are not a home product that you can make it at home.
I'm saying
they are being produced, and somebody is selling it to them. Like in this case, one can say because of those political kind of a thing, were these dissidents of...
No, that's a fair point. No, I'm saying that sitting here in India, we are looking at so many of our own airlines, I mean airlines coming into India and going out, whether belonging to whether Indian carriers or not. What should I be thinking of? I mean, or what should these airlines be doing? Should I be putting pressure on these airlines to ensure that they don't fly or overfly conflict zones?
I don't
the question.
You see, Govind, let's put it this way. I don't think airlines can play a role in it. The fact is that if you're flying from Mumbai to London, right, you have a direct flight and you have flights by various European and Gulf destinations. Every airline will follow the same kind of routing because there is a particular agency that determines the kind of route that you will take. Now, it is there that you need to attack and say, I need to fly on a safe corridor, even if it means an hour of extra flying. Now here, as I said, so far, planes up in the air, barring the acts of terrorists when the country was against those kind of particular group and they wanted to punish that country, but they're doing it. But this is a case, accidental, where somebody has shot down a civilian aircraft when wanting to shoot down some other thing. Now somebody has to look at and exercise control. It's a very, very sad day as far as civil aviation is concerned, because you're going to be up against a new challenge that was hitherto not foreseen that this kind of a thing can happen.
So, Mr. Goel, really, this is for people who are going to fly, and I mean, so many people obviously fly westbound. Their airlines will take them over some conflict zone or the other. It may be up north in Ukraine, or it may be further south to Syria, but there could be so many. So what should passengers or what should we be concerned about, and should we be putting pressure on either airlines or via the airlines or via the government, the ICAO, to find new routes which are safer?
Yes, I think ultimately responsibility has to be taken up by organizations like ICAO, because it is their job to ensure air safety and security of the world aviation.
Right. And do you feel that passengers will be willing to bear that? Let's say, assuming the go around involves another half an hour or 1 hour of additional flying time, will passengers be sensitive enough to understand the need for it and the implications, or do you think that's going to be another hurdle?
No, actually, I don't think you have to take so much diversion. Basically, if at that much of height, the diversion would be not more than half an hour or so, or sometimes only 15-20 minutes extra. So I think all airlines and ICAO have to meet regularly. Monitoring has to be done regularly, and wherever we feel that such a situation should not be allowed to happen in the future. In fact, what I am worried about is that the first Malaysian airline plane disaster which took place, there also that time I think some air exercises were going on between America and Thailand, and God knows what had happened, because we don't have any conclusive evidence of anything. So it is very, very important. This is a wake-up call for international aviation and all airlines of the world to please look at your air navigation routes and your air corridors again, and ensure that the safety of the passengers is not compromised.
Right. So look at revisit air corridors, at least put pressure on ICO via governments and airlines to revisit air corridors. What else can we do, Mr. Bhargava, to ensure that we are better prepared for this new world?
No, having...
It's like a post 9/11 world. I mean, the life changed. I mean, security stepped up, and so
any
on, right?
major incident leads to innovations. Now, perhaps Boeing and Airbus had thought at one time that allowing a plane to fly at an altitude of 35, and they're made up to fly up to 40,000 feet and not above. Well, perhaps they'll say, okay, let's create aircraft which can fly at an altitude of 60,000 feet so that the missiles can't reach. Something of this kind, we'll have to work on it. Now, this is, of course, without thinking. Now, something will have to be done. As I said, A, try and prevent something of this kind, that you've got rebellions on ground who can take the extreme measure of shooting down a plane with civilians on board. That's simply not kind
of whom they have no idea.
Second is to be cautioning, as I said, to say that I'm not going to be flying over certain countries where I know there is an element of risk involved. So howsoever longer it is, howsoever thing you have a one-stop trip kind of a thing to go by, is to look at it. Right. But what we have witnessed, as I said earlier, is unprecedented, has happened for the first time. People will take note of it and come out with solutions. It's not the first time technically. I mean, passenger jets have been shot down.
I have a third,
as I said earlier, there it was. If it was Libya versus states, there were a tussle between the two countries. Everything, if an Indian plane got hijacked by Pakistanis, there was a reason behind kind of a thing to go by, right? But here I'm talking about a totally different new dimension.
Completely random.
You have got a missile and you shoot a missile and it gets onto a plane
Jitender,
which doesn't involve any of these two disputed countries.
I have a third aspect to what you said, and which is that just get rid of these let's have a disarmament policy in place where you don't have these kind of arms going around. I mean, I sound like a peacenik, but really, I mean, you can have a plane flying at 16,000 feet up, and then you'll have arms which reach 60,000, then you'll have 80,000. So, I think that this is getting surreal, Govind. It's almost like you graduated from some video game to reality. And with destruction, which is
while we talk about aviation response, also focus on the military.
Missile of this kind, there should be some accountability. Now, the question is being produced by factories which are controlled by the governments or private major companies. Now, if you are selling it to somebody, please kind of identify the person. Why is there that you have a confusion at the moment? Who was controlling the missile and who shot the thing?
Right.
The reality is
that
298 people have met an unnatural death, uncalled for. And look at the kind of family, the kind of perception, as you very rightly said. You see, the perception is very important. Now, people would be apprehensive, kind of a thing to go by. that, okay, if you're flying kind of over a territory of this kind, oh, is my next kilometer safe? Is my next 10 kilometers safe? Kind of a thing. Where you normally, airlines are there who provide you service. Once you're boarded a flight till your destination, your safety is in my hand. Now, safety is in my hand, the airline. Security in whose hand is the question.
Is the big question, and that's, I think, a note to end on. Our thoughts and prayers are, of course, with the families of those on MH17. Thank you very much for joining us on the India Hangout. We're going to be back soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.